An alarming new chapter of post-Roe America opened up quietly on Friday night. At first glance, it's going to sound like a story about one state that already bans abortion, but there's a ripple effect that's going to roll back abortion access nationwide, and it's by design. Here's what happened. Louisiana sued the Food and Drug Administration over a rule that allowed the abortion pill mifepristone to be prescribed and dispensed via telehealth. The state's argument was that mail-order access to abortion medication undermined that state's abortion ban. On Friday, a federal appeals court panel agreed and issued a ruling temporarily blocking mail-order access, not just in Louisiana, across America. Nearly two-thirds of all abortions in America are medication abortions. It's important to understand that this ruling is going to be devastating for patients who live in states where abortion is banned, but it will affect patients in states where abortion rights are still protected. Starting now, and for as long as this ruling is allowed to stand, it will be harder for anyone seeking a medication abortion to access one. It's one more medically unnecessary roadblock for women who are trying to access safe and reliable health care across the country. The drug maker that makes mifepristone has already asked the Supreme Court to step in and reverse the appeals court ruling on an emergency basis, but for now, it is in effect, which means medication abortion is less accessible to everyone in America who might need it, and particularly to those women who cannot go in person to a doctor to get it because their state bans abortion. The end of Roe was always the beginning and not the end of the anti-abortion movement's agenda, and it's not going to stop until abortion is unavailable, inaccessible, or illegal everywhere. And here's the thing. It doesn't stop with abortion. The very same radical movement to control women's bodies is also going after birth control. And it's getting no small amount of help from the Trump administration, which is quietly rewriting the rules of a decades-old federal program that gave access to birth control to millions of Americans. In 1970, Congress created Title X, which expanded access to contraception and reproductive health care for low-income families. As of 2023, roughly 2.8 million people received services through Title X. 85% were women, 48% were people of color. 72% of those who got care through Title X say they used the contraception they received for family planning. But now they could lose that access because the Trump administration is shifting the program to focus on so-called natural family planning. I'm going to say that again, natural family planning. That pushes tracking menstrual cycles as a form of pregnancy prevention instead of using birth control. In its new guidelines for funding, Title X grants in 2027, the Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services writes, quote, "We expect applicants to demonstrate how their Title X projects will integrate non-invasive, evidence-based practices that promote health, literacy, fertility awareness, and reproductive health without unnecessary medicalization or symptom suppression," end quote. Unnecessary medicalization or symptom suppression. In plain terms, that means less birth control, more cycle tracking. These new guidelines could affect the funding that a clinic gets when it reapplies for funding in 2027. The shift comes even as the overwhelming majority of Americans support access to contraception. We don't talk about this a lot because it's not even close. 91% of Americans say they believe they support birth control. We're not talking about abortion. We're talking about contraception. 91% of Americans say it should be legal. 91% of Americans probably don't agree that it's Sunday today. So why are we rolling back access to contraception? University of California Davis law professor Mary Ziegler has an idea. She says that as Trump's approval ratings continue to drop, he's become eager to appeal to social conservatives at the fringe of his base. She writes, quote, "Without the pill, contraception, conservatives seem convinced that women would be more likely to prioritize marriage and child rearing. And if that happened, these advocates suggest, we'd all be better off." Then there is the rising influence of pro-natalists who want to see more babies being born and blame contraception in part for declining birth rates. Mary Ziegler joins me now. She's a professor at the University of California Davis Law School. She's the author of many books, including Personhood, The New Civil War Over Reproduction. Mary, it's great to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to touch that last point, the idea that if you don't have access to contraception, people will have more children. All across the developed world, people are having less children, and there are a multitude of factors involved in that. The education of women, the access that women have to the workforce, the economy's needs, the cost of rearing children, the availability of childcare. contraception is but one part of a very large equation that we need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that makes the contraception point obviously wrong is that Americans have had access to contraceptives for decades now, right? And we've seen a steady decline in birth rates, not because we've had more access or different access to contraceptives. There haven't been particularly new effective contraceptives on the market in the United States since the early 2000s, right? So if we're seeing a change in birth rates in the United States, it's not because we're seeing a change in contraceptives. So this is in some ways, I think, more of an excuse to focus on birth control than it is an actual change produced by birth control.
So why you write that contraception has gone from politically untouchable to a real target on the right? What is that shift about?
Well, I think it's two things, right? So you mentioned earlier, Ali, that the Trump administration has not really done as much as the social conservatives want on abortion. It's strange, right, that the abortion case headed to the Supreme Court is Louisiana suing the Trump administration. So in part, the Trump administration is looking for a way to appease social conservatives because it hasn't known how to approach the abortion issue. At the same time, we've seen a lot of different Trump constituencies who are unhappy with him on many other things unite on birth control, right? So there's become a kind of new coalition politics of opposing contraception. And the president is looking for a way to reach those social conservative voters who are angry with him about other things when the administration still doesn't know how to approach the abortion issue.
Let's turn to this ruling on the abortion pill, mifepristone. The court didn't ban it outright, but it did restrict access through telemedicine and mail delivery, which is the way in which many people get mifepristone. Talk to me about how significant this change is in the practice of how women will access abortions.
But it's really going to be, I think, a bombshell in states where abortion is a crime, because there's lots of data to suggest that abortion rates have not really decreased in states with bans. And the reason for that is a network of what have been called shield laws, right, where doctors in states like California have been able to mail pills into states like Louisiana. But that whole system is predicated on the availability of telehealth, and that's going to go away, at least with respect to mifepristone. There's some sign that some providers may pivot to other methods of medication abortion, but that remains to be seen. At the moment, though, we may see people in these states be forced to travel out of state, to rely on less proven medication abortion protocols or get surgical procedures. And that's just in banned states, right? I mean, people in other states who don't live near an abortion clinic are now going to have to go in person, right? There are almost half of counties in California, which has the most clinics in the United States. Half of those counties don't have a clinic, right? So the ripple effects are going to be felt everywhere. So
public health experts say that this could have consequences that go beyond abortion access. If you start restricting telemedicine, in the uses of mifepristone, there's also an effect on miscarriage care or frankly, pregnancy care in general. Talk to me about patient safety. Telemedicine was a very big advance for patient safety.
Yeah, absolutely. So telemedicine, this sets a precedent. Essentially, the argument is that telemedicine is more suspect and the FDA has to be more careful in authorizing telemedicine treatments involving key drugs. And that's an argument that could be made about a variety of medications. And that would have particularly powerful impacts on people in rural America, right, for whom access to healthcare is not easy if you have to go in person. There's reason to believe, at least with respect to mifepristone and probably with other treatments, that we'd be looking at particularly significant impacts with teenagers. We've seen data that teenagers are especially likely to use telehealth in some contexts. So we're thinking about patient safety, but also remembering that there are particular communities of patients who are going to be especially affected.
Well, in your book, you examine personhood laws and the push to expand rights to the unborn. Talk to me about the connection between restricting contraception and the anti-abortion agenda in that sense.
Yeah, well, so the anti-abortion movement, in addition to believing that Americans have kind of abandoned traditional family formations that we need to flourish, also believes that a lot of common contraceptives are in fact abortifacients, right? So they believe that the birth control pill, IUDs, that these are drugs or devices that actually prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg. And they believe that constitutional rights begin the moment an egg is fertilized. So if that's right, then contraception is something that violates human rights, that is tantamount to murder, the same way that abortion would be. So that's part of what's driving this fight, both against abortion and contraception, and kind of what the through line is between the two.
Mary, always great to talk to you. Thank you for being with us this morning. Mary Ziegler is an historian and law professor at UC Davis Law School. She's the author of the book Personhood, The New Civil War Over Reproduction.